The polished oak and gold leaf doors of Federal Courtroom 402 swung open with a heavy, ominous creak, exposing a room packed to capacity. Sunlight filtered through 80-foot stained glass arched windows, casting cold geometric shadows across 300 spectators, media reporters, corporate litigation teams, and law clerks. Sitting at the plaintiff's mahogany table in a custom $7,000 Italian silk suit was my older sister, Kendra. Beside her sat her husband, Vance Sterling, a cutthroat real estate mogul whose multi-million-dollar development firm was built on aggressive foreclosures, backroom political favors, and stepping on anyone who got in his way. Kendra crossed her legs slowly, flashing her massive 3-carat emerald ring under the recessed courtroom lights. She turned to her lead high-powered corporate attorney, Mr. Richard Croft, and let out a soft, theatrical laugh that echoed off the cold marble floor. "Look at this place, Richard," Kendra sneered, adjusting her diamond-encrusted earring with a manicured hand. "My black sheep younger brother actually had the delusion that he could challenge us in federal court. He's been a broke, pathetic, spineless loser his entire life. 20 years ago, I told him to his face that he'd never amount to anything. And today, I'm going to personally ensure he loses every single penny he has left in his bank account." Richard Croft gave a polished, condescending smirk, adjusting his silk tie as he tapped a 4-inch-thick binder of legal motions against the table. "Don't waste your energy worrying, Mrs. Sterling," Croft replied smoothly, his voice dripping with supreme confidence. "We filed enough preemptive motions and financial penalty claims to crush him before he even steps foot inside this room. The federal magistrate will read our summary judgment motion, rule completely in our favor, and order your brother to pay $500,000 in our legal fees within 30 minutes. Kendra leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, her face lit up with cruel, venomous satisfaction. She smoothed down her designer dress, checking her gold watch, eagerly waiting for the double doors of the judge's private chambers to open, so she could witness what she believed would be my complete financial and emotional execution. Suddenly, the side brass doors near the bench swung wide open. 2 heavily armed United States Marshals in sharp navy dress uniforms stepped out, taking up rigid positions on either side of the raised judicial bench. The court bailiff stepped forward, holding a heavy rosewood gavel, striking the wooden sound block 3 times with deafening force. His voice boomed through the vaulted, silent room. "All rise for the Chief Presiding Federal District Judge!" Kendra stood up casually, smoothing her hair, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She tossed her head back, looking toward the bench with cold amusement, fully expecting an elderly, white-haired veteran judge to step out to grant her motions. The chamber door swung open. A man dressed in dark, flowing federal judicial robes stepped onto the elevated wooden platform. He carried a heavy leather docket, walking with an unyielding, effortless posture of absolute authority. His eyes were calm, sharp as tempered steel, and his presence instantly filled the entire courtroom. It was me. Kendra's arrogant smile froze mid-frame. Her eyes widened until they looked ready to pop out of her skull. The blood drained out of her face so fast that her skin turned a sickly, translucent gray. Her hands began to shake violently, her breath catching in her throat with a horrific wheezing sound. Her knees buckled beneath her so suddenly that she had to grab the edge of the mahogany table with both hands to prevent herself from collapsing onto the floor. Beside her, Vance Sterling dropped his gold Montblanc pen. It hit the floor with a loud metallic clatter, rolling aimlessly across the parquet floor. The bailiff raised his voice, the solemn words echoing off the ancient stone walls. "Court is now in session. Presiding, the Honorable Chief Judge Leo Vance. All persons having business before this honorable court, draw near and give your attention." I sat down behind the high bench, resting my hands on the dark wood. I adjusted my reading glasses, arranged my files with calm precision, and then raised my eyes. I looked directly down at my trembling, terrified sister. She had spent 20 years telling our family, her friends, and the world that I was a worthless failure who would die in poverty. She had absolutely no idea that the worthless brother she had dragged into court was now the chief judicial authority of the entire federal district, and the exact man sitting in judgment of her life. 20 years of poison and promises. To understand the sheer magnitude of Kendra's terror in that courtroom, you have to understand the 20-year trail of poison, betrayal, and quiet sacrifice that brought us there. My name is Leo Vance. I am 45 years old. In our family, Kendra was always the golden child. Born 3 years before me, she possessed a sharp, calculating mind paired with an obsessive desire for high society, expensive labels, and public applause. I was the exact opposite: quiet, introspective, deeply committed to reading, ethics, and the fundamental principles of justice. When our father passed away suddenly from a stroke when I was 19, he left behind a modest family estate, a piece of prime commercial waterfront land in our hometown, and a $60,000 educational trust fund intended to pay for both of our university degrees. Our mother, broken by grief, trusted Kendra implicitly. Kendra took advantage of that grief instantly. Using emotional manipulation and false promises, Kendra convinced our mother to grant her full power of attorney and administrative control over father's trust fund. Kendra promised she would manage the funds responsibly and pay for my tuition when my semester started. Instead, within 18 months, Kendra spent every single cent. She bought designer wardrobes, leased luxury sports cars, took lavish trips to Paris and Milan, and funded her entry into elite country clubs to network with wealthy bachelors. When the time came for me to pay my second-year university tuition, the university bursar informed me that my check had bounced. The trust fund was completely empty. I confronted Kendra in the living room of our family home. She didn't offer an apology. She didn't even drop her eyes. She stood there wearing a $1,200 trench coat, holding a glass of white wine, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You're a weak, pathetic dreamer, Leo," Kendra had sneered, laughing directly into my face as she pulled on her leather gloves. "You think life is fair? You think you deserve a piece of Dad's money just because you read books? I use that money to secure my future. You don't have the stomach for the real world, Leo. You'll never amount to anything. You're destined to spend your life at the very bottom, while I marry into real power." I didn't yell. I didn't smash anything. I didn't raise my hands. I looked at her for a long, quiet 10 seconds, packed my single canvas duffel bag, and walked out of the house. While Kendra married Vance Sterling, a rising real estate shark who made his millions by aggressively evicting low-income families and bribing city zoning officials, I plunged myself into a life of relentless, invisible labor. I worked double shifts. I spent my nights working as a midnight security officer at a commercial shipping yard, sitting under a buzzing fluorescent bulb studying law textbooks until 5 a.m. I attended a state law school on a partial work-study scholarship. I lived in a tiny basement apartment that smelled of damp concrete, survived on instant noodles and canned soup, and wore the same 2 thrift store suits for 4 years. Whenever mandatory family gatherings occurred, a rare holiday dinner or our mother's birthdays, Kendra made it her personal mission to ensure I felt like an outcast. At our mother's 60th birthday dinner at an exclusive steakhouse, Kendra arrived in a chauffeur-driven stretch limousine. Vance bought $500 bottles of wine for the table, loudly bragging about his corporate land acquisitions. When I arrived wearing my simple, worn suit, Kendra waited for the entire table of 12 relatives to go silent before delivering her strike. "Oh, look, everyone! Leo made time in his busy schedule to join us." Kendra laughed loudly, tossing a crisp $200 bill onto my dinner plate in front of everyone. "Here, Leo, take this. I know how hard it must be surviving on a low-level clerk's salary. I can't bear seeing my brother wear suits that look like they came out of a charity donation bin while my husband closes $50 million deals." The relatives chuckled nervously. My mother looked down at her plate, too intimidated by Kendra's financial control to say a word. I picked up the $200 bill, folded it neatly, placed it back beside Kendra's wine glass, and enjoyed my meal in absolute silence. What Kendra and her arrogant husband failed to realize was that while they were chasing flashiness, vanity, and dirty money, I was quietly building an unshakable, indestructible foundation. After graduating at the top of my law class, I refused lucrative offers from corporate law firms. I didn't want to help billionaires dodge taxes. I entered public service, taking a position as an assistant United States attorney in the Department of Justice. For 15 years, I worked in the shadows. I led federal task forces against public corruption, transnational bank fraud, and corporate racketeering. I tried cases in high-security federal courtrooms, earning a reputation among federal judges and law enforcement agencies for having an ironclad memory, zero tolerance for deceit, and an absolute mastery of statutory law. 5 years ago, following a unanimous bipartisan confirmation by the United States Senate, I was appointed to the federal bench as a United States District Judge, holding life tenure under Article 3 of the Constitution. Because federal judges maintain strict privacy profiles to prevent security threats, my official address and personal life were scrubbed from public registries. Kendra, locked in her shallow bubble of country club brunches, luxury shopping, and social media posturing, never bothered to look up federal judicial appointments. She assumed I was still a struggling, low-level legal researcher working in some dim basement office. Until Vance Sterling's insatiable greed drove them directly into my crosshairs. The greed that triggered the trap. 14 months before the confrontation in Courtroom 402, our mother passed away quietly in her sleep. In her final years, she had managed to hold on to one primary asset, our father's original commercial waterfront property, which had skyrocketed in value over the decades due to urban development, reaching a market value of roughly $3 million. In our mother's original, legally registered will, executed 7 years prior when she was in sound mind, she explicitly instructed that upon her death, the property was to be sold and the proceeds divided equally between Kendra and me, with my half earmarked for a charitable educational trust. However, 3 weeks after our mother's funeral, Kendra and Vance produced a revised will and power of attorney. This new document, allegedly signed by our mother just 4 days before her death while she was admitted to St. Jude's Hospice Care Center, transferred 100% of the property rights directly to Vance Sterling's Development Corporation for a token payment of $10. Vance immediately drafted blueprints to demolish the historic structures on the land and build a multi-million-dollar luxury residential tower. When a copy of this fraudulent document arrived in my mail, I didn't immediately file a criminal complaint. Despite everything Kendra had done, I gave her one final opportunity to salvage her humanity. I called her on her private phone. "Kendra," I said, keeping my voice soft, calm, and measured. "I received the revised trust document for Mom's waterfront property." Mom was under heavy palliative care and heavy sedation during her final week at St. Jude's. She didn't sign that document, Kendra. You and Vance forged her signature. I am asking you, as your brother, to destroy that document. Let's execute Mom's original will, split the estate as she wanted, and settle this peacefully. Kendra let out a screech of hysterical, mocking laughter through the speakerphone. "Are you completely out of your mind, Leo?" she yelled, her voice practically dripping with venom. "You think you can lecture me on law? Vance has a team of 6 corporate defense attorneys on retainer. We own city council members, we own zoning boards, and we have unlimited money. You're a nobody, Leo. A broke, pathetic loser who probably can't even afford a retainer fee for a real lawyer." She took a deep breath, her tone turning icy cold. "If you so much as utter one word about forgery to anyone, Vance and I will file a multi-million-dollar defamation and tortious interference lawsuit against you. We will drown you in legal fees, strip you of whatever tiny savings you have left, and leave you living on the street. Do you understand me?" She slammed the phone down. 10 days later, Kendra and Vance took the offensive. They filed an aggressive federal declaratory lawsuit in the federal district court, seeking a formal judicial decree validating the forged will and requesting $500,000 in legal damages against me for maliciously clouding property title. They deliberately filed the case in federal court, believing that their high-priced DC litigation team would intimidate me into waiving my rights and surrendering without a fight. Their arrogance blinded them to basic reality. They never checked the judicial roster of the district court. They never bothered to see who sat as chief judge. When the case file hit the automated federal court clerk system, it was flagged under emergency administrative jurisdiction. Because the case involved allegations of federal document fraud and perjury within the district, it was routed directly to the desk of the chief district judge, me. Under federal recusal rules, if a judge has a personal interest in a civil matter, they must step aside, unless the case involves direct fraud committed against the court system itself, in which case the chief judge holds strict statutory authority to conduct preliminary evidentiary sanctions and handle criminal referrals. I didn't recuse myself from the preliminary hearing. I set the court date, I cleared my calendar. I ordered Federal Courtroom 402 prepared. The reckoning in Courtroom 402. The silence inside Courtroom 402 was so absolute that you could hear the faint ticking of the brass clock on the back wall. Kendra sat frozen in her chair, her hands clutching the polished edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. Her husband, Vance, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Sweat began to pool at the base of his collar, soaking through his expensive custom shirt. "Please." "Be seated," I said, my voice calm, flat, and echoing with unyielding judicial weight. Kendra sank back into her seat, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Her lead attorney, Richard Croft, leaned over to her, his face pale, frantically whispering in a panicked tone. "Mrs. Sterling, what is going on here? Why is the chief district judge looking at you like that?" Croft whispered harshly. That's my brother," Kendra stammered, her voice cracking so hard it was barely audible. Croft stared at her, as if she had suddenly grown two heads. Your brother? You told us your brother was an unemployed legal researcher working out of a basement." I arranged the thick blue files sitting in front of me, adjusting my reading glasses, looking down at the plaintiff's table. "We are convened today," I began, my voice projecting effortlessly through the high-vaulted room. "In the matter of Sterling Development Corp. v. Leo Vance, case number 88 Civil 402. The plaintiff moves for summary judgment, validating an amended property transfer deed executed on October 14th. Vance Sterling cleared his throat nervously, pushing his chair back, attempting to stand up. "Your Honor, if I may explain the context." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," I commanded instantly. My voice didn't rise, but the absolute power behind it made Vance drop back into his chair instantly, his mouth shutting tight. "You are a party to this action. Your counsel will speak, and you will remain silent until called." I turned my attention to Richard Croft. "Mr. Croft, as officer of this court, you submitted Exhibit A, a notarized power of attorney and revised trust agreement bearing the signature of the late Eleanor Vance, dated October 14th. Croft swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes, Your Honor. My clients assured me the document was legally executed." "Did you independently verify the circumstances of that execution, Mr. Croft?" I asked smoothly. I relied on the notarized statement provided by my clients, Your Honor," Croft stammered, stepping back slightly. I opened the thick blue folder sitting in the center of my desk. "Prior to this hearing," I stated, "this court issued an administrative subpoena to St. Jude's Hospice Care Center, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Document Laboratory." Kendra let out a faint, terrified gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "The certified medical records from St. Jude's Hospice," I read aloud, "confirm that on October 14th, the decedent was under continuous, high-dose palliative sedation, completely comatose, and medically incapable of speech, cognitive comprehension, or physical movement." The entire courtroom erupted into quiet, shocked murmurs. Press reporters in the gallery began writing furiously in their pads. "Furthermore," I continued, "the FBI Forensic Laboratory conducted a high-resolution spectral analysis of the signature on Exhibit A. Their report confirms that the signature was artificially traced using a digital template created from an old signature on a 2018 tax filing. The notary seal was fraudulently applied 3 days after the decedent's death." Richard Croft turned to Kendra, his eyes filled with pure rage and professional panic. "You lied to me," he whispered through gritted teeth. "You submitted forged documents to a federal court." Croft turned back to the bench, bowing profusely, his hands shaking. "Your Honor, my firm was completely unaware of these forensic findings. We request immediate leave to withdraw our appearance and move for a voluntary dismissal of this lawsuit without prejudice." "Motion denied," I replied instantly. The word hit the room like a heavy iron weight. "Your Honor, please," Croft pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We were misled by our clients. A party cannot enter a United States federal court, submit forged documents under penalty of perjury, attempt to use judicial authority to finalize a land theft, and then simply walk away when they are caught," I stated coldly. I leaned forward over the elevated bench, looking directly into Vance Sterling's terrified face. "Under Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, I am striking the plaintiff's complaint from the record in its entirety, with prejudice. Furthermore, under Article 18 of the United States Code, I am issuing a direct judicial order directing the United States Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to initiate immediate criminal proceedings against Vance Sterling and Kendra Sterling for federal bank fraud, document forgery, perjury, and conspiracy. I picked up the heavy rosewood gavel, holding it high. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling are ordered remanded into the temporary custody of the United States Marshals, pending formal grand jury arraignment. I brought the gavel down against the block with a thunderous crack. Court is adjourned. The lesson, written in stone. The collapse of Vance and Kendra Sterling's illusion of power was swift, total, and mercilessly complete. Within 48 hours of the hearing in Courtroom 402, news of the federal criminal indictment broke across real estate and financial news networks. Vance Sterling's commercial lenders panicked, immediately calling in over $30 million in emergency loan balances. Facing federal prison time for bank fraud and document forgery, Vance's corporate partners executed emergency buyout clauses, stripping him of his CEO title and kicking him out of the firm he helped build. To pay for high-level criminal defense attorneys and avoid a decades-long prison sentence, Vance and Kendra were forced to liquidate everything: their multi-million-dollar estate, their European sports cars, their art collections, and their high society club memberships. Under the pressure of impending federal charges, Vance turned on Kendra, filing for divorce and blaming her entirely for the forged will. Kendra was left with nothing: no money, no status, no husband, and a pending federal conviction on her record. 3 months after the trial, I sat in my quiet judicial chambers on a rainy Thursday evening. The soft sound of rain tapped against the high glass windows as I finished reviewing case files. A quiet knock sounded at the heavy oak door. My judicial clerk stepped in softly. "Judge Vance, your sister is waiting in the main lobby downstairs. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's been sitting there for 3 hours in the rain. She's begging for 5 minutes." I stayed silent for a moment, looking at the rain outside, then gave a quiet nod. "Bring her up." A minute later, Kendra walked into my office. She was completely unrecognizable. The designer silk dresses, 3-carat diamond rings, and arrogant high society posture were gone. She wore a simple, faded winter coat, her hair unstyled, her eyes red, swollen, and hollowed out by months of constant weeping and fear. She stood near the doorway, clutching a cheap canvas bag, unable to look me in the eye. "Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. Can I speak to you?" "Sit down, Kendra," I said quietly, gesturing to the leather chair across from my desk. She sat on the edge of the chair, covering her face with her shaking hands, sobbing quietly in the dim light of my office for a long time. Vance took everything in the divorce settlement. Kendra wept, her voice breaking into ragged gasps. "The bank seized the house yesterday. All the people I thought were my friends at the country club won't even answer my phone calls. I have nowhere to go, Leo. I have no money, no home, and I'm facing probation and community service. I ruined my entire life." I sat behind my desk, watching her with quiet, peaceful sadness. I felt no joy in her destruction. I felt no urge to gloat. "I didn't ruin your life, Kendra," I said softly. "Your own insatiable greed, arrogance, and cruelty did this to you. You built your entire existence on the belief that money and status made you superior to other human beings." "I was so blind, Leo," she cried out, dropping to her knees on the floor in front of my desk, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "I was so cruel to you. For 20 years, I treated you like garbage. I told you that you were nothing. I was jealous of your integrity, Leo. I was jealous because Dad loved your character more than my flashiness. Please, you're a powerful federal judge now. Please help me." I stood up from my chair, walked around my desk, and stood before my weeping sister. "When you told me 20 years ago that I would never amount to anything," I said quietly, "you defined amounting to something by the car you drove, the brand of your purse, and how many people you could step on to feel powerful." I shook my head slowly. "You never understood that true human worth is not bought in luxury stores. It is forged in the dark through sacrifice, discipline, integrity, and quiet service to others. I cannot alter the criminal justice system for you, Kendra. You must face the legal consequences of your actions and learn how to become a human being of real humility. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a brass key, and set it on the wooden table beside her. "This is the key to Mom's waterfront property," I said. "The land has been officially transferred to a non-profit foundation. We are building a free educational community center and law clinic on that site for underprivileged youth who can't afford an education." Kendra looked at the key, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "There is a small caretaker's apartment at the back of the property," I added softly. "You may live there rent-free, provided you work 30 hours a week cleaning the facility and serving meals to the students. It is time for you to learn the value of silent labor." Kendra reached out, taking the key in her shaking hand, weeping uncontrollably. "Thank you, Leo. Thank you." I picked up my leather briefcase, put on my overcoat, and walked toward the door. True human authority, success, and dignity have never been defined by high society titles, expensive clothes, or arrogant boasts. Arrogance always builds fragile castles out of sand, screaming for the world to watch. But when the tide turns and the storm arrives, those castles wash away into nothingness. Real strength, real honor, and real character stand firm in silence, enduring every trial until truth and justice prevail. I turned off the lights in my chambers, stepped out into the quiet marble hallway, and walked out into the cool night air. Leave the word justice in the comments right now if you believe that true human worth is proven through integrity, character, and silent service, never through arrogant grandstanding or shallow wealth. Arrogance always demands a stage, but true honor stands unbroken until the truth is revealed. If this story reminded you to never let anyone dictate your value, limit your potential, or define your future, hit that subscribe button right now. Because tomorrow, I am bringing you the unbelievable story of a quiet 42-year-old female military mechanic who was publicly fired and mocked by a corrupt garage owner, only for a 4-star armored convoy to pull into her shop 3 hours later to hand her a multi-million-dollar defense maintenance contract. I'll see you in the next story.